June 6, 1942. Somewhere in the Pacific, the United States Navy was attempting something that, only 2 days earlier, had seemed impossible. The aircraft carrier USS Yorktown was still afloat. She had been bombed. She had been torpedoed. Her crew had abandoned her. She was listing badly, without normal power, scarred from one of the most violent carrier battles ever fought. And yet Yorktown had refused to sink. Now, men were climbing back aboard. Pumps were running. Fires were being fought. Heavy equipment was being thrown over the side. A small fleet tug had a line attached to the carrier and was slowly pulling the enormous ship through the Pacific. For the first time since Yorktown had been abandoned, there was genuine hope. They might actually save her. What the men aboard Yorktown did not know was that beneath the surface, a Japanese submarine was already approaching, and its commander had been given one objective: finish what Japan's aircraft had failed to finish. USS Yorktown had survived the Battle of the Coral Sea. She had survived emergency repairs at Pearl Harbor. She had survived Japanese bombs at Midway. She had survived torpedoes. She had even survived being abandoned. But now, as American sailors fought to bring their carrier home, one Japanese submarine was quietly slipping through the destroyers protecting her. And within minutes, the rescue of USS Yorktown would become another disaster. The ship that wasn't supposed to be there. To understand why the Navy was willing to risk men and ships to save Yorktown, you have to understand what she had already survived. Less than a month earlier, Yorktown had fought at the Battle of the Coral Sea. It was a strange new kind of naval battle. The opposing surface fleets never came within sight of one another. Aircraft did the fighting. American planes struck Japanese ships. Japanese planes struck American ships. And Yorktown was hit. A Japanese bomb smashed through the carrier and exploded deep inside. Near misses added further damage. When Yorktown finally returned to Pearl Harbor on May 27th, engineers inspected the battered ship. A proper restoration would take far longer than the United States had, because American intelligence had already uncovered Japan's next move. Midway. Admiral Chester Nimitz needed every carrier he could get, so Pearl Harbor's shipyard crews were given an almost absurd assignment. Don't completely repair Yorktown. Repair just enough of her to fight. Welders, electricians, engineers, and sailors worked around the clock. Damaged sections were patched, systems were restored, temporary repairs replaced permanent ones. Yorktown arrived at Pearl Harbor on May 27th. 3 days later, on May 30th, she sailed again. She wasn't completely repaired. She didn't need to be. She only needed to reach Midway. And when the battle began on June 4th, Yorktown was exactly where Japan did not want her to be. By late morning on June 4th, 3 Japanese carriers were already burning: Akagi, Kaga, Soryu. American SBD Dauntless dive bombers had transformed the Japanese attack on Midway into a catastrophe. But one Japanese carrier remained operational: Hiryu. And Hiryu immediately launched a counterattack. Japanese dive bombers found Yorktown around midday. The carrier's radar detected the incoming strike. Fighters scrambled. Anti-aircraft guns opened fire. Japanese aircraft fell from the sky, but enough survived. 3 bombs struck Yorktown. One tore through the flight deck. Another damaged the ship's uptakes and affected her boilers. A third penetrated deeper into the carrier. Smoke poured from Yorktown. Power disappeared. For a moment, she looked finished. But below decks, Yorktown's damage control teams began fighting back. Fires were contained. Boilers were restarted. Electrical systems came alive. The list was controlled. Within roughly an hour, Yorktown was moving again. From the air, the transformation was extraordinary. A carrier that had been smoking and apparently crippled was once again steaming through the Pacific, and that caused a remarkable mistake. When Hiryu's second strike later arrived over the American fleet, the Japanese believed the apparently operational carrier below them was another American ship. It wasn't. It was Yorktown again, the same carrier Japan had already attacked. This time, the Japanese came with torpedoes. Yorktown maneuvered desperately. Several torpedoes missed. 2 did not. Explosions slammed into the carrier's port side. Yorktown lost power again. Her list increased dangerously. The situation was now completely different. Captain Elliot Buckmaster feared the carrier could suddenly roll over. And if that happened with thousands of sailors trapped inside, the loss of life could be enormous. The order was given. Abandon ship. Men climbed down ropes and nets. Destroyers moved close. Boats filled the water. Sailors jumped from Yorktown into the Pacific. Thousands of men who had fought fires, repaired engines, and defended the ship now watched from nearby vessels as their carrier leaned toward the sea. They had done everything they could. Now they waited for Yorktown to die. But Yorktown didn't sink. The morning after, night came, then morning. Yorktown was still there, damaged, listing, silent, but afloat. The carrier had survived the night, and that changed everything. If Yorktown could remain afloat without her crew, perhaps she could be saved. Captain Buckmaster wanted to try. A small group returned to the abandoned carrier. The danger was obvious. There could still be fires below decks. Flooding could suddenly worsen. The ship could roll without warning. Japanese forces might still be nearby. But the value of Yorktown was enormous. America had entered the Pacific War desperately short of aircraft carriers. Losing one could not simply be accepted if there was even a realistic chance of saving her. The minesweeper Vireo was ordered to Yorktown. Vireo was tiny compared with the carrier. Yorktown displaced tens of thousands of tons. Vireo had never been designed to drag something like this across the Pacific. But there was no time to wait for the ideal ship. A tow line was passed. Vireo began pulling, slowly, painfully slowly. The huge carrier began moving, toward safety. The speed was barely a few knots. At times, even maintaining the carrier's heading was difficult. But the important thing was that Yorktown was moving. She was no longer simply a wreck waiting to sink. A rescue operation had begun, and the next morning, the Americans committed even more men to it. They went back aboard. Before dawn on June 6th, Captain Buckmaster returned to Yorktown. With him came selected officers and sailors. Their task was simple to describe and enormously difficult to accomplish: save the ship. The plan was systematic. Extinguish the remaining fires. Pump water out of flooded compartments. Counterflood other sections to reduce the list. Cut away heavy objects from the listing side. Throw aircraft overboard if necessary. Remove guns. Restore enough systems to stabilize Yorktown. Make the carrier easier to tow. The destroyer USS Hammann came alongside. Hammann became Yorktown's lifeline. Hoses ran between the two ships. Electrical power could be supplied. Pumps could operate. Men and equipment could move more easily aboard the carrier. And slowly, the condition of Yorktown began improving. Water levels fell in some compartments. A stubborn fire was extinguished. Crews prepared heavy 5-inch guns to be cut loose and dropped into the ocean. Anything that could reduce the list was considered. The salvage team was not merely delaying the inevitable. They were making progress. After everything Japan had thrown at Yorktown, American sailors were beginning to believe they might actually take her back. And that was when a completely different threat entered the story. Not from the sky, from beneath the ocean. I-168, Japanese submarine. I-168 was commanded by Lieutenant Commander Yahachi Tanabe. Japan knew Yorktown had been badly damaged. The carrier was too important a target to ignore. Tanabe was sent toward the area. But Yorktown was not alone. American destroyers circled the carrier. Their job was to protect the salvage operation from exactly this kind of attack. To reach Yorktown, I-168 would have to penetrate that screen. One mistake could expose the submarine. Once detected, destroyers could attack with depth charges and turn the ocean around I-168 into a killing zone. Tanabe approached carefully. Hour after hour, the submarine worked closer. At one point, when Tanabe looked through his periscope and recalculated the attack, something unexpected had happened. Yorktown had moved. The tow was working. The Americans were actually pulling the carrier away. That movement complicated the Japanese commander's firing solution, but it also confirmed what was happening above him. The carrier Japan had supposedly destroyed was being saved. Tanabe continued his approach. Above the submarine, the American salvage crews kept working. Men were pumping water, cutting away weight, restoring systems. Hammann remained tied directly alongside Yorktown. Vireo maintained the tow. Destroyers continued circling outside. Everything visible above the surface suggested the rescue was succeeding. Everything invisible beneath it was moving toward disaster. 4 torpedoes. Then came the warning. Torpedo wakes. Lookouts saw them racing across the water. There was almost no time. Hammann attempted to get away from Yorktown. Gunners opened fire toward the incoming torpedoes. Men aboard both ships braced themselves. 4 torpedoes had been launched. One slammed into Hammann. The explosion struck near amidships. The destroyer's hull buckled catastrophically. Hammann began to break. She sank with terrifying speed. Men who had been supplying Yorktown with power, water, and equipment suddenly found themselves fighting for their own lives. Yorktown was hit as well. New explosions tore into the already wounded carrier, the ship that American sailors had spent 2 days trying to save shuddered under another attack. Then came another horror. As Hammann disappeared beneath the surface, underwater explosions erupted. Depth charges carried by the sinking destroyer detonated below. The shock traveled through the water. Men already thrown into the sea were caught in the blasts. The force slammed through Yorktown's damaged hull. Equipment broke loose, fixtures crashed down, men were thrown across decks. In a matter of minutes, the entire salvage situation had changed. Hammann was gone. Yorktown had been torpedoed again. The submarine responsible was somewhere nearby, and every destroyer in the area now had another mission. Find I-168. The submarine escapes. American destroyers began hunting. Depth charges exploded through the Pacific. But I-168 survived. Tanabe had accomplished what Japanese carrier aircraft had failed to do. He had struck Yorktown at the exact moment America was trying to rescue her, and then he escaped. Back aboard Yorktown, Captain Buckmaster faced another decision. Could they continue? The carrier had absorbed an astonishing amount of punishment. A bomb at Coral Sea, more bomb hits at Midway, 2 aerial torpedoes, days of uncontrolled flooding and listing, and now another submarine attack. Men had repeatedly returned to save her, but the situation was becoming too dangerous. The remaining salvage effort was suspended. The Americans withdrew again, and for the second time, Yorktown was left largely alone. Still, even now, she did not immediately sink. One more night. The afternoon passed. Yorktown remained above water. Night arrived. She was still there. For a ship that had been declared nearly finished multiple times, it was an almost surreal sight. But the new torpedo damage was different. Water continued entering the carrier. The list increased. There was no longer a full salvage crew aboard to fight it. No Hammann alongside supplying power. No organized attempt to correct the flooding. Yorktown had survived almost everything because men had repeatedly fought to keep her alive. Now there were no men left aboard who could stop what was happening. During the early morning hours of June 7th, Yorktown began rolling farther. The enormous flight deck tilted toward the ocean. The hull rose. Water swallowed the carrier section by section. Just after dawn, USS Yorktown rolled onto her side and disappeared beneath the Pacific. The ship that Japan had struggled for days to kill was finally gone. But the story of her sinking is strange because Yorktown did not simply die during the Battle of Midway. She survived the battle long enough for America to try to save her. That difference matters. How close did they come? It's tempting to describe the salvage operation as hopeless. A doomed ship, a desperate crew, a symbolic final effort. But the actual work aboard Yorktown tells a different story. The carrier was under tow. Fires had been extinguished. Water levels in flooded areas were being reduced. Counter-flooding had begun. Heavy equipment was being removed to correct the list. The salvage team was making measurable progress. Even official Navy accounts later described the situation as increasingly hopeful. Nothing guaranteed that Yorktown would reach Pearl Harbor. Towing such a badly damaged carrier across hundreds of miles of open ocean would have been extraordinarily difficult. Weather alone could have destroyed her. Flooding could have returned. Temporary repairs might have failed. But by the afternoon of June 6th, the possibility of saving Yorktown was real enough that American sailors were still aboard risking their lives to do it. And that makes the attack by I-168 dramatically different from the earlier Japanese strikes. The aircraft attacked Yorktown while she was fighting. I-168 attacked Yorktown while she was being rescued. The irony of Midway. There is another reason the story feels almost cruel. Strategically, the United States had already won. Japan had entered the Battle of Midway with 4 fleet carriers: Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, Hiryu. All 4 were lost. The Japanese invasion plan collapsed. A carrier force that had dominated the Pacific since Pearl Harbor had been shattered in a matter of days. Yorktown had helped make that victory possible. Her aircraft participated in the attacks. Her presence forced Japan to divide attention between multiple American carriers. Even after Yorktown herself was crippled, aircraft associated with her continued fighting from Enterprise. By the time I-168 attacked, the larger Japanese defeat could not be reversed. The submarine could not restore the 4 lost carriers. It could not restart the invasion of Midway. It could not undo the strategic shift taking place in the Pacific. But it could deny America one final prize: Yorktown herself, the destroyer beside her. And Yorktown was not the only loss. USS Hammann deserves to be remembered as more than the destroyer that happened to be tied beside a carrier. Hammann had already rescued survivors during the battle. Then she returned to the danger zone to help Yorktown. She supplied water, power, pumping assistance, damage control support. Her position directly beside Yorktown made the salvage operation possible. It also made Hammann catastrophically vulnerable when I-168 attacked. When the torpedo struck, she had almost no time to escape. The destroyer disappeared within minutes, and the underwater explosions that followed killed men who had survived the initial hit. The attempt to save one ship had cost another. That is what makes the final chapter of Yorktown's story so different from a simple sinking. It was a rescue operation, and rescue operations create hope. Hope that the fires can be stopped, hope that the pumps can keep up, hope that a tow line can hold, hope that a crippled carrier can somehow be dragged hundreds of miles back to Pearl Harbor. For a few hours on June 6th, those hopes did not look unreasonable. Then 4 torpedo wakes appeared. The final paradox, USS Yorktown became famous because of Midway. But the strange part of her story is not simply that she sank there. It's how difficult she was to sink at all. Japan hit her with bombs, her crew restored her. Japan hit her with torpedoes, her crew abandoned her. She stayed afloat. The Americans returned. They began stabilizing her. They attached a tow. They started dragging her towards safety. And only then did a Japanese submarine penetrate the screen and strike again. Yorktown finally sank on June 7th, 1942. But by then, the carrier had already helped destroy the force Japan had sent to capture Midway. The ship was lost. The battle was not. And perhaps the most remarkable part of Yorktown's final days is that even after the order to abandon ship had been given, after her engines had stopped, after her crew had left her drifting in the Pacific, America still came back for her. For a brief moment, it looked like they might succeed. Then I-168 appeared, and the carrier that had survived almost everything finally ran out of chances.